What's up, folks? Welcome back to another episode of Charm City Heavyweights Podcast, brought to you by the great folks at Great 8 Sports and Memorabilia in Parkville, Maryland. I'm the host, Matt Trigger. With me, as always, is my co-host, Josh Merrill. What's going on, Josh?
What's up, Matt? Coming live from the man cave.
Coming
Trying to get
live
over
with,
this Oreo series. That was terrible.
yes, facing a little bit of technical difficulties. I am running this from the phone tonight. So, we are joined by a special guest. He is the managing editor at Ravenswire, and he is the host of Locked On Ravens podcast, Mr. Kevin Oestreicher. Kevin, how you doing, man?
What's going on, guys? I'm doing good. Glad to be here. Excited to talk Baltimore sports. It was a rough Orioles series, but maybe we'll get DeAndre Hopkins in Baltimore, and that'll wash it all away.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's been a interesting offseason for the Baltimore Ravens. We are in the midst of a complete overhaul of the offensive system, and we are in the I guess the lull days of the OTAs and the off season right before we get cranking into training camp, which is just under 8 weeks away.
Yeah, and I think everything that the Ravens have to offer right now is just getting better on the field. OTAs are obviously a big part, especially when you're putting in a new offense. I mean, I know a lot of conversation last year, even around like Lamar last year, was him not being at OTAs. It would be different if it was this year and, he wasn't there and Todd Monken with the offense. But the difference last year is he didn't have a contract last year. So a lot of people were saying, is he skipping for the contract situation? But he's there, he's ready. And I know a lot of people last year with OTAs were saying, well, Lamar's not there. He's not going to be ready for the season. He's going to be rusty. And then he went out there and he was like the MVP of the league for the first 3 weeks. I mean, he didn't necessarily continue that after then, but I think for now, it's a lot of just getting better and getting the offensive system down, which, the football school thing, I don't think Baltimore's ever done something like that before. I think this is the first time, at least from what I can recall, the first time they've done a football school. You had veteran leadership out there. So it's kind of the lull period right now. But, hey, guys are still getting cut. I mentioned DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know how likely that really is, but I'm glad we're not talking about DeAndre Hopkins being a must-have because the wide receiver room's still a weakness. I'm glad they addressed it the way they did, and if they don't sign him, it's not the end of the world.
Kevin, can you remember a time in Ravens history where we had this much talent on the offensive side of the ball?
It's tough. This is by far the best offense Lamar's had, like especially wide receiver wise. The 2019 offense, he was doing that with like Willie Snead and Seth Roberts and those types of guys. And so, like, now you have Odell, who's proven. Obviously, we don't really know necessarily what he is. But at the same time, I do think that with a guy like Rashad Bateman coming back for year 3, also you have a guy like Zay Flowers coming in who's a 3-level receiver. That's just different. I think a lot of stuff that's being underrated now is like Mark Andrews. People are like kind of forgetting, they also have a guy in Mark Andrews who is this all-world tight end. The running game, they're not going to be running the ball as much this year. I think they're going to be throwing a lot more. But offensively, you kind of look at it on paper with Lamar, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Flowers, Beckham, Bateman, Andrews, and then the offensive line, too. 4 out of 5 guys are setting there. Stanley, Zeitler, Linderbaum, and also Moses. The only real question mark is left guard. I'd probably say it'd be Ben Cleveland, but we'll see. But this is an extremely talented group. On paper, I'm very high on it. Obviously, you have to figure out where guys are going to be in the new offense. But with Todd Monken, I also think, you upgraded the offensive coordinator position. I think Todd Monken is a breath of fresh air, and I'm excited to see what Lamar can do. I don't know if it's going to be 6,000 yards, but I don't know. I think he can do a lot this year.
Kevin, where do you see a guy like Gus Edwards fitting in, man? Like, because I agree with you. I think we're going to throw more than we run, and Dobbins has already proven if he's not getting touches, he's going to say stuff. Where do you see Gus fitting in since carries are going to be tight?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, over the course
completely new system now.
Yeah,
it's not
exactly. It's exactly what it is. I mean, we know that what we knew with Greg Roman, it was going to be ground and pound, pass offense goes to the tight ends. Like the wide receivers were pretty much an afterthought for the most part in that offense. So now with, Dobbins, I can't remember the exact stat, but I think J.K. Dobbins has only gotten 15 carries or over 15 carries once in his entire career.
Yeah,
it's honestly, it's kind of weird because the era of the NFL now is moving away from bell cow. So like it's less and less common that you see a guy like a Saquon or a Derrick Henry who's getting 20, 25, 30 carries a game. I do think Dobbins deserves more than what he has been getting because I think he's that good of a player. But the thing with the Ravens is they don't really pay running backs, or at least not substantial contracts. This is J.K. Dobbins, a contract year for him. And I'm sure he's thinking about, hey, what's my NFL future? I think it'd be great if Baltimore was able to re-sign him. But a guy like Gus Edwards is someone who they did end up extending and who was still good. And I think should be the second guy. I think it should be J.K. Dobbins is like year one and Gus Edwards is year two while still using them in somewhat of a committee, but J.K. Dobbins leads that backfield. So I think it'd be fine if Gus Edwards got 8 to 10 carries per game and you give Dobbins 14 to 18. Even then, you're probably on the higher side of carries because where's Lamar? What does Lamar do carry wise? We're not going to see as much running from him, I don't think. I mean, they've made it pretty clear that's not going to happen. So I think for Gus Edwards, it could be a decreased role. Maybe you could see 6 to 8 carries for Gus Edwards, and then Dobbins gets 12 to 16 or 18, and Lamar can get, I don't know how many, 4, 6, 8, whatever. But I think Edwards is an interesting situation because with Dobbins entering a contract year, my prediction is they don't re-sign him. I would love it if they did. I think he's a great player, but they just historically don't do that. And I think Dobbins is going to have a good enough year this year where he's going to demand a contract that the team will give him. I just don't know if it's going to be the Ravens. So Edwards is going to be valuable with the whole bell cow situation, taking the load off of these guys too. It's important to have, I think, 2, 3 very quality, capable running backs. But to me, Edwards is a player that's still really good and almost he's underrated in my opinion. But with Dobbins being the way he is in terms of how good he is and how dynamic he is, there's an argument to be made to maybe make him the main guy, and then Edwards is kind of the second fiddle.
It's interesting because with JK, it's an odd situation to say the least. He's been hurt. He missed, what's equivalent to almost a season and a half worth of work, and with the way this offensive line run blocks, and you have guys like Andrews who can block, not extremely well, but he can block, and then you have Patrick Ricard, who is your Swiss Army knife. He can do it all. He can block. He can catch. He can, do the whole move tight end situation if need be. Isn't running back really kind of just a plug and play position, especially with the Baltimore Ravens? You got, like you said, Gus is going to get his carries, especially on short yardage, on goal line, in situations where we know that he needs to get the tough yards. J.K. is a good running back, and he needs to show that he's able to stay healthy for a relatively long period of time during the season. I know it's a long game, the added 17th game and all that, but the Ravens never really had a problem finding running backs, whether it's undrafted free agents, whether it's an odd free agent signing here or there, somebody like Alex Collins, who was a cast-off, or somebody that we drafted high, such as a Ray Rice and J.K. and those type of guys. And Jamal was a top 5 pick, and that was 23 years ago at this point. Do you think that we're not really in a situation where signing J.K. should be at the forefront, even if he has a good year?
I don't necessarily think it would be because of the way the running back position is valued now. The way the market the running backs have at this point is just complete. It has crashed completely into the ground. Teams don't want to pay running backs. Teams don't want to give them even second contracts. I've seen multiple Titans people with how good Derrick Henry is. They're saying, they never want to give a running back a second contract again with how bad that situation. And not that Henry's played badly. He's one of the best running backs in the league, but it's just the way that running backs are valued now. It's more than ever, once a running back hits, it used to be 30. 30 was the age for running backs where everybody said, all right, this guy isn't good anymore. It was very rare you found a running back over 30 that was good. That age has now decreased to 28, 27, to where you're saying, well, these guys, they don't have the legs anymore. And it depends. Like a Saquon, for example, a Derrick Henry, for example, those bell cows that are getting that 20, 25, 30 carries per game, by the time they are 27 or 28, they have so many miles on them. Teams are saying, we just want to get younger, quicker, faster. And the NFL is already moving. It already has moved into that throw it, air the ball out type of offense. So the position in general, teams want to pay wide receivers big money. That's where they want to go. where the premium positions, running back is at the bottom of that list. It's quarterback, wide receiver, corner, offensive line. Those are arguably the best, the biggest premium. Edge you can also put in that conversation too with the contracts they're getting. So for the Ravens and J.K. Dobbins, if he goes out there and has, 80 carries, I think it'll be a little more than that, probably 150 carries, let's say, for, 950 yards and 7 touchdowns. A team's going to want to pay him because it would be a second contract running back, and Dobbins hasn't necessarily played the miles or has the miles that another running back would have because he was injured for that 2021 season. Now, the injury itself, teams have to be comfortable with the medical on that. I think he's had now the year to recover. He wasn't necessarily himself after coming back we saw that in the Pittsburgh game where there were, runs he probably should have scored on, but he didn't because he wasn't fully there yet. But he's a player that is extremely dynamic. And while the Ravens will have a couple of other guys they'll need to re-sign, if they have enough money to re-sign a guy like J.K. Dobbins, they can. Eric DeCosta is very good at kind of maneuvering the cap. And is all of those bigger contracts go out like the Mark Andrews, Marlon Humphreys, and even guys like Ronnie Stanley? The Roquan Smith contract will take that place. The Marcus Williams contract will take that place because how backloaded those deals are. So if the Ravens can find a way to make, maybe a 3-4 year deal with J.K. Dobbins work, make the first year cap hits low, maybe they can. But at the end of the day, maybe Keaton Mitchell breaks out, who is their undrafted guy to East Carolina, and they decide that they can find another guy in the 4th round and Edwards is enough there. Or maybe they decide they need a guy like J.K. Dobbins. So I don't think it's going to be at the forefront for them, but I wouldn't be shocked if they do it. My prediction right now, Joe, is just because they won't, because they don't pay running backs historically.
And it's not that they don't pay. I mean, they've, other than Jamal getting a second deal, Ray Rice got a second deal, but with all respect to the situation, we know why Ray didn't finish out his second contract. But if you look at his Super Bowl year, where he was averaging 5.2 or 5.3, and then in the following year he dips down to 3.7, the fall off is dramatic, and that was his age 26 going into the age 27 year. So what you were saying has some merit, has quite frankly a lot of merit to it. People don't realize, like, when you talk about Derrick Henry, he's the exception to the rule. People forget that he ran for 5,000 yards in his senior year of high school, and then he,
that's insane.
It's insane. Yeah. He was averaging like 450 yards a game, and then he sits for a year at Alabama, and then he starts getting a little bit of playing time, and then he's been running to the ground. He's the exception to the rule. He's a freak of nature. He's 6'3", 255 pounds. He's bigger than half of the defensive ends in the NFL. So that's the exception to the rule. But,
make sure you give AP his credit, because that man was like 40 out there running like a damn 20-year-old.
Again, the exception to the rule. But JK is not. I like JK. I think JK is going to have a good year. And I wanted to kind of touch on something that you said, Kevin. I truly believe that this is going to be the year where there's not going to be nearly as many designed runs for Lamar. I think this
you
is going to be
now. He's paid. It would be silly to.
I mean, that's all well and good, Josh. That's true, and I hear you. But I think with this new offense, I think that Monken's going to do a lot better relying on the players that are designated to carry the ball. I think everybody's going to have a much more, carved out, spot in this offense, to where we're not going to have to rely on Lamar to carry the ball 10 to 12 times a game, where he might only have to run when the pocket breaks down or he doesn't see anybody open downfield. So do you necessarily agree or disagree with that?
I mean, I think that, you're right in the fact that Baltimore's they don't have a need to run him as much anymore. And we, if you go back to like 2018 and even, some of 2019, they've moved away from, the RPO game where they're running RPOs every single play. And that was early on. And for the design runs for Lamar, you don't have to do that as much now. Todd Monken is someone who, at this point in his coaching career, has coached at the NFL level, has coached at the college level, has had success. His years in Tampa and Cleveland weren't great team success wise. He only lasted 1 year in Cleveland before the coaching staff ended up getting overhauled. But he had multiple 1,000-yard receivers in Cleveland with, Jarvis Landry and Odell, who's now in Baltimore. Mike Evans was a multiple-time 1,000-yard receiver there. And so for Lamar running the ball, I mean, you can run him I don't know. I think it's a balance because you don't want to fully take it out because it still is an asset, but you don't want to run him into the ground. And again, injuries happen. Both of Lamar's injuries happened throwing the football. They were passing plays. He was running out of the
Exactly.
pocket.
In the
So
pocket.
again, it can happen on any given play. Now, anytime a player gets hit, he can get injured, and even non-contact injuries happen too. If you go back to early, like 2018, one of the things that I identified is Lamar fought for that extra yard at the expense of getting crushed, like getting absolutely leveled. He's gotten a lot better protecting his body in those situations, and instead of picking up 1 extra yard on a 14-yard run, he'll get out of bounds and protect himself from that hit. But at the same time, now you do still have Dobbins and Edwards. You're going to throw the ball a lot more. It's in terms of balancing how much you want to actually run Lamar on those design plays, where I think we're going to see it more in third down situations where teams might not be expecting it, where we're going to see it a lot less, and it's still an asset because Lamar, we've seen him go pick up 15 yards on a third down. We've seen him bust it up the middle for a 50-yard touchdown on those plays. So that's why, to me, you don't want to take it completely out of the offense, and I don't think they will. But you can lessen that load now because you have Odell, you have Rashad Bateman, you have Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews and all those guys, plus the running backs in Dobbins and Edwards. So I would, Lamar, the days of him consistently getting 12, 14 carries a game are over, in my opinion. I think we're going to see him definitely more in the single-digit range. And some of those will be just broken down plays. Maybe one game it'll be more because there were so many broken down plays. And there were some instances early on in his career where he would run the ball when he should have thrown it and there was a guy open. There were other instances where he should have thrown the ball and he ran it instead. He's gotten a lot better in that decision-making aspect too. But I'd anticipate maybe 5 to 9 carries a game for Lamar on average, with maybe the ability to have a little bit more based off a game script. Because if it's working for you, it's working. And if that's how you win a football game, that's how you don't want to necessarily take guys out of rhythm. I think Greg Roman did that a little too much in Baltimore. So if J.K. Dobbins has the hot hand, keep feeding it to JK. If Gus Edwards has a hot hand, keep feeding it to him. And if Lamar has, a hot throwing arm, or if he's breaking down a defense running, I think game script is very important. In-game adjustments are very important. I think that the Ravens have had a bit of trouble doing that over the last couple of seasons, but I think Todd Monken provides a bit of fresh air in that department because he's proven to adjust in-game and be really good at it.
That's a fair assessment. Speaking of the running game, and while we're on the topic, a lot of people have been talking about it over the airwaves recently. With the change in the offense, where does Patrick Ricard fit in? Because now you're looking at a situation where we've moved on from Nick Boyle. He's now trying to be a long snapper with the Pittsburgh Steelers. You have a situation now where a traditional fullback might not be in the cards. And I'm not saying that, every team utilizes a fullback, because they don't. We're one of the few that still does. But in Todd Monken's offenses, fullbacks aren't very prevalent. So does Ricard kind of revert back to the inline tight end position, or do you see him possibly getting more looks on the defensive line, or do you see him where do you see his role on this team as an offense, with the offense now completely changed 180 degrees?
He's not going back to the defense, I don't think.
No, I don't think he's going back to the defense either. I think I've thought about this and I still don't know the answer, because Patrick Ricard was needed in a Greg Roman offense. If you ran that style of offense, you needed a fullback who could impose his will, get out into space, and be versatile like he was. But now with this offense, they're running it less. We're going to see a lot more 3-4 wide receiver looks. Mark Andrews, you can put him in the slot too. And with that, I don't know where he fits. I mean, Greg Roman was putting him in the slot last year. That was not, I still don't know why that happened, but it happened. I think that Ricard is such an interesting case because I don't see a pure great fit for him. I guess in line in those heavy packages would be it. You can still use him, but he's a player to me where I think his snap count is going to decrease significantly. And it's not because of the type of player he is. I still think he's a good fullback, but you mentioned it, Matt, where fullbacks are getting phased out of the NFL. It was either recently, it was new. I think it was Kansas City, where they said we're just not having a fullback. It's just the NFL is going a different direction. It's been that way. I don't know the exact number of fullbacks in the league now in terms of teams that actually utilize them significantly. it has to be in single digits by now. I don't think it's more than 10 teams. But the Ravens were one that utilized them the most because in that run style offense, you needed that type of player. We're going to see Lamar throw a lot more this year. And with that, the run game is not going to be as prevalent. Not that it's not going to be successful, but it's just not, there aren't going to be as many carries. And I think heavy personnel where, the Ravens carried 4 tight ends and they would use Nick Boyle, go back to even Nick Boyle, Hayden Hurst, Mark Andrews, that 3 tight end heavy set where in 2019 it gave so many teams problems. Ricard was in on that too. You don't need that as much anymore. If you run 2 tight ends on the field or 3, Isaiah Likely can be a threat as a pass catcher. And I know the blocking was a bit iffy for him last year. I think he'll be better there. But there just aren't going to be as many carries. So Ricard is truly like this piece of the puzzle that I just don't know where he fits in. And I think to me, his snaps are going to decrease significantly at the expense of these heavy wide receiver looks where we're going to see 3 or 4 guys on the field. And that's okay. A new offensive coordinator, not all the personnel is going to fit. I don't know where he fits with Baltimore. We will probably see him on the field some, but I just don't think it's going to be nearly as much as what we've seen of him over the last couple of years.
And part of it is not only the decrease in snaps because of the offense changing. You paid him a lot of money for a fullback. That's a lot of money. I know he's in the $4 to $5 million a year range, or the cap hit at least. I mean, I'm not saying get rid of Patrick Ricard because he's valuable to the team. It's not like
I think they're going to find a way. Moncton is going to have to adjust some parts of his offense to fit because this team's built around Lamar. They're going to have something for him. I'd be shocked if he's just riding the bench. He's got too much talent.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect him to be a game day inactive every week. I think he's still going to be. And John Harbaugh said after the season, after they got rid of Greg Roman too, that they're still going to utilize both pass and run techniques. I don't know how much it's going to be, but they still want to utilize the guys that they have. And I still think Ricard has a role. I just don't think it's going to be as significant as it has been because the offense is shifting into that throw mode more as opposed to what it has been, which is heavy personnel, run the football down your throat. They can still do that in games, but they brought in these wide receivers for a reason. So I think it's going to be you put 4 wide receivers out there instead of Ricard in some situations where maybe in a Greg Roman offense you would have had Ricard out there. So he's still going to be a big part of the team. I just don't think it's going to be as big as it has been.
Kevin, what's your biggest fear on this team? If one thing's going to be our Achilles heel, if you had to guess now, I know it's early, but what's your biggest concern right now that you'd like to see Eric address?
Yeah, the offseason is not done yet, but I am a little worried about edge. And part of that is because they're really only 3 deep right now. It's David Ojabo, Odafe Owe, and Tyus Bowser. They have Tavius Robinson, but I wouldn't want him playing big snaps. I think he's more of a developmental prospect. Could be good in a couple of years. But if David Ojabo and Odafe Owe, I know people are expecting big years from them. We expected it out of Owe last year, and he didn't produce based off of expectations. So if one of those guys has to either miss time or just doesn't produce the way they're expected to, they're getting really thin there. And they have defensive like you could play Brent Urban as a big edge if you want to. I would not be my first or near second or third or fourth choice, but you can do it. There are enough good guys out there though, where if you bring back a Justin Houston, Yannick Ngakoue, Leonard Floyd, Jadeveon Clowney, I'd feel a lot more comfortable there. I also think corner I think I'm a little more worried about edge than corner right now because Rock Ya-Sin was added, but it's almost like it's a little different than wide receiver because they really went all in on the young guys. Then you have Marlon Humphrey in the corner room, which you know who he is. He's a top 5 guy, but you're going to have a guy like Pepe Williams, Jalen Armour Davis, it may be Trayvon Mullen, who's new, or Kyu Blue Kelly step up. And if either one of Rock Ya-Sin or Marlon Humphrey goes down there, it'd be interesting. There's the conversation of who plays inside. Rock Ya-Sin's an outside guy. I think he played over 80% of his snaps outside last year. Marlon Humphrey can play inside. We saw him do it really well when they needed him to, but I'd prefer to keep him on the outside. So do you move Kyle Hamilton inside and play the big nickel role that he did? And maybe you play Geno Stone in the strong safety role, maybe. Marcus Peters is an interesting fit because he is an outside guy, and I think that's more of a Ravens thing than it is a Peters thing because he's not back with the team, and Peters is commenting on Lamar's posts, and there have been rumors about why he's not back in Baltimore yet. I think that's more of a break glass in case of emergency type thing. But the only really slot guys left are Bryce Callahan, like Chris Harris Jr., who aren't necessarily the prime options you would want. So I think Adrian Amos actually makes a lot of sense if they want to play Kyle Hamilton in the big nickel role. But I think if I had to pick one weakness where I'd want to see somebody come in before the season starts, I think edge to me, because they're three deep right there, and that's very, very thin in today's NFL.
I was talking to Josh about this, and I know Josh. We talk about it a lot. Calais Campbell is, even though he was 37 years old this year, he's going to
still a
be a
beast.
big piece. He was still a beast. He was still going to be a big piece missed. Um, I seem to be along the thought process that if you're going to replace Campbell with anybody, I think Jadeveon Clowney fits that bill. And I'm not saying it for a pass rushing perspective. He's he's an excellent edge setter, and he is a similar big body that is still athletic enough to get it done. And I think that there would be a little bit of an added incentive playing against Cleveland, considering they really didn't take care of him the way that he wanted them to. So the popular name floating around still that's left out there is Leonard Floyd. He's still a free agent, and there's a reason why he is. Everybody that's still available has something wrong with them. That teams deem something wrong with them. How do you feel about the Ravens possibly adding Clowney to having is that inside 3/5 technique guy that can alleviate some of the responsibilities of somebody like Odafe Owe?
Yeah, I actually like Jadeveon Clowney. I think a lot more than some people do. I think some people are very out on him because of his inconsistent production. I know there was a thing that happened in Cleveland, and some people just don't want, what they deem a headache. But I agree with you where the inside-outside versatility, especially today, is actually very important. And Baltimore, they had it. Like Campbell's someone who, he had that where we saw the Ravens play him on the edge, and he is still, that's the big loss. I've tried to make it clear that I think Campbell's a really big loss for them. I don't think it's, it ends their Super Bowl hopes. I don't think it's that, but it's unfortunate they had to let him go. So Clowney is somebody who I think I would play primarily at edge if I were the Ravens, but you can move him inside on some of those downs. And someone actually kind of similar, he's not my first choice of guys who I'd want the Ravens to bring in, but Jason Pierre-Paul had that inside-outside versatility for them last year. I think he provided it was very up and down for me with Jason Pierre-Paul, but he's somebody who wouldn't cost a lot. You can play him on the edge or play him inside. So it's that type of player where if you want to go pass rush specialist with a guy like a Justin Houston or a Leonard Floyd, I'm fine with that because I think they're good enough on the defensive line with Michael Pierce coming back, who was really good. He was so good for them in the first couple games he played before going down. And then the young guys, Justin Madubuike, Broderick Washington, and also a guy like Travis Jones. So I think that Clowney would be good because of that inside-outside versatility, but Justin Houston is someone who knows the defense, is familiar, was in that system last year. Wouldn't shock me if they wanted to just go that route. I think he still has. It was his year was so interesting because he was so good the first part of the year. He had nine and a half sacks in the first games before the bye, and then I think had 0.5 or no sacks after it. So very inconsistent, but to me, I think Clowney be a good option because of the fact that he can play inside and outside. And with Campbell gone, I think it is a need for them because you can't play Pierce on the edge. I don't think you can play a guy like Travis Jones on the edge. Madubuike you could risk it and do it. I think he could, but I wouldn't. So I think Clowney be a solid option for him.
I was just thinking about it, and a lot of the guys you mentioned, they are pass rush specialists at the end of the day. And I loved Houston. I've been a champion Houston being here the last couple of years. Josh thinks I'm a sucker for names as opposed to reality, which I am. I was all aboard the OBJ train when he signed here.
When Des Bryant signed here, Kevin, that dude had a party at his house.
He's throwing up the X and everything.
Yeah, I was throwing up the X. Yeah.
He acted like we were getting the Des that Tony Romo had. Like, bro, he's older and hasn't played in 10 years.
Yeah, that one didn't work out too well.
No.
I look around the team and we, it seems like the secondary is, squared away, like you said, with Adrian Amos as a possibility. We've heard that thrown around. Harbaugh has said that Brandon Stevens is moving back to the strong safety role. And if they do indeed drop Hamilton back in the box as the big nickel, I would prefer to see Stevens on the field before Stone, because Stone seems to me like he's a preseason All-American, and then he kind of fizzles out when he's got to see the first stringers for majority of the NFL teams. So
I disagree with that, Matt. I think Stone plays well when he gets in.
I'm not saying he doesn't play well. I'm just saying reality hits him when he's got to play the ones, because he always looks great in preseason. It's been the story the last couple of years.
Well, because he's a little bit better than all those guys, so he shines.
Exactly. But I would like to see Stevens play a little bit more. I'm interested to see what they do with Patrick Queen now that we're on the defensive side of the discussion, Kevin. Queen showed up for everything. He was there for OTAs. I think he was there for a portion of football school. He's been at practice next to Roquan. He's showing up. Do you think he's a Raven this year when it all comes down to week 1?
Yeah, I do. I think he will be. I think it'd be very hard to find value that would be worth it for him at this point. I mean, he's somebody who I think is going to play really well. He played really well last year, especially next to Roquan Smith in that defense. But to me, teams are probably looking for linebacker help and saying, well, we'll give you a 4th or we'll give you a 5th. And that to me just doesn't seem worth it for, I think, the production they can get out of him. And I don't think he's going to come back to, like, after this year, I think he leaves. You know, the 5th year option was declined. I think a team will pay him. And 1, it'll probably be out of the Ravens' price range. And 2, maybe he'll just want to go somewhere else where, you know, he'll have that number 1 linebacker role. I don't know what it is. But in that case, if he signs a huge deal, you're still getting it the very worst, or at the very best, a 3rd-round comp pick, maybe a 4th. And so to me, if you're trading him for a 4th and not getting the production this year, to me, that just doesn't seem like the trade-off I'd want, especially because I think a lot of people, you know, the Trenton Simpson pick was the Roquan Smith deal was the first, like, oh, what does this mean for Patrick Queen? Then the Trenton Simpson pick was, oh, wow, what does this mean for Patrick Queen? But I wouldn't be wanting to play Trenton Simpson a huge amount this season. I think, honestly, what they could do is I talked about edge being like their 3 deep there. Simpson is so versatile. They could play him at edge and kind of have that be his like primary role this year, and then kind of work him into the inside linebacker role once Queen in this situation departs. So for me, we've seen guys like Trenton Simpson in the league, you know, Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins in Arizona. Those are guys who are very versatile, can move all over the field. But at the end of the day, they were thrown into a role way too early, and it stunted their growth incredibly to the point where I think Isaiah Simmons had his 5th year option declined. He's been very inconsistent. Zaven Collins hasn't been the guy that they wanted in Arizona either. So to me, throwing Trenton Simpson into that inside linebacker role immediately is not, I think, what I would do if I were Baltimore. And this still allows you to put 2 inside linebackers on the field, be very competitive there. You can still have 3 safeties if you want to, and just Mike McDonald utilizing these players. So I think Patrick Queen will be, unless there's the Jair Alexander trade that's on the table to get him a star. And they say, well, we want Patrick Queen in that deal. I'd do it then. But if you're only getting a 4th or a 5th back for him, I just don't think the production you would lose, especially in a year where I think Baltimore can be Super Bowl contenders. I don't think the production they'd lose is worth a mid-round pick when you're probably going to get it anyway if he leaves because of the deal he signs.
I wanted to kind of throw this out there. I saw, I can't remember what site I saw it on, but there was a hypothetical trade scenario where Patrick Queen heads down 95 to the Commanders, and they send us Chase Young, and there's a little bit of draft pick compensation. Is that something that's completely, you know, out of the realm of possibility, or is that something that could be possible given the right circumstance?
I think it'd be possible. I personally, Chase Young has been so inconsistent. The injury situation also with him. It depends what Baltimore would value. You know, if they feel comfortable enough putting Trenton Simpson next to Roquan Smith or Malik Harrison, whatever they wanted to do there. I think that I would just sign someone. Like I would sign Clowney or Houston or whoever, Floyd or whoever, and have Patrick Queen there instead of bringing in, because I feel like the compensation that would be attached to Chase Young would be like a 5th or a 6th or something. Like it wouldn't be a 3rd or a 2nd. So to me, if you can just bring in somebody, the Ravens have, I think it's about $11 million or so in cap space right now. I know some people want that reserved for DeAndre Hopkins, and I understand that. But I do think that if you just sign someone, you don't have to give up Queen, and then you have Queen anyway. I think maybe you could get the same or better production than Chase Young would give you. Maybe Chase Young breaks out and he's really good in DC this year. Maybe that's what happens. But I just think I'd keep Queen in the defense because it worked well for him last year. And then if he walks, and you get the mid-round pick.
It's fair.
Does anyone think Eric was being honest when he said we plan on resigning Patrick Queen?
Yes and no. Yes and no.
I think it was the save face. He was mad. He was making it known he was upset.
I think I think that was like, you talk about what's GM speak, like coach speak, player speak when they get up there and talk. I think, he's not going to go up there and say, yeah, he's done. We're not re-signing him. Like that's that.
Right.
You're not going to go up there and say that. So I would not expect them to re-sign him. Maybe they can pull something out where I talked about how they structure deals where right when the Stanley, Andrews, and Humphrey deals are set to expire, that's when the Roquan deal gets pretty big cap hit wise. That's when like Roquan Smith's cap hit this year, I think is $9 million. Marcus Williams, I think, is 7 or something, or maybe it's 9 too. Those deals start to become big cap hits in the next couple of seasons. So maybe they re-sign Patrick Queen and they say, oh, well, we'll make these first year cap hits low and then we'll make the maybe third or fourth cap hits high. I just don't think they will have enough money to do that. Like we saw with Zadarius Smith and Matt Judon a couple of years ago. You can't re-sign everybody. It'd be great if Baltimore could re-sign Patrick Queen, but investing that much money into 2 inside linebackers with Roquan Smith, it was fine because it was one, and he's probably one of the best, if not the best, inside linebackers in this league. Queen is really good, and I think he's going to have an even better year this year, but I don't see a way he's back unless they can work out a lesser deal. Maybe Queen struggles and they bring him back. I just don't think he's going to struggle, and I think he's going to get paid elsewhere. We saw Tremaine Edmonds get a huge deal, and Roquan Smith got his, so I think Queen will get a deal. I don't think it'll be as big as those guys, but it'll be one that's out of the Ravens' price range, and I don't think he'll be back.
Definitely not.
Yeah, it's crazy how we were, banging on the table for Patrick Queen to step up for the last couple of years, and all of a sudden we bring in a dog at middle linebacker that's an absolute just monster player.
Oh my God, that trade was a great day, wasn't it? When I saw that come on my phone, Ravens trade for Roquan, I was like, what?
Well, I remember everyone wanted Brandon Cooks, or at least a lot. I don't know if you two did, but a lot of people wanted Brandon Cooks, and then Roquan came. Roquan was kind of floated. It's like, oh, maybe they could make this deal because he'd be great in the defense. But everybody wanted Brandon Cooks or a wide receiver, and then they got Roquan. And some people were really mad that they didn't get a wide receiver. And I said, this is great. What are you talking? Like Roquan's one of the best linebackers in the league. So I was happy. I thought it was a great deal.
And then you got a chance to keep the dude. Like, go for it.
I was just curious about the whole Queen situation because he's rubbing a lot of fans the wrong way. The people that put, they vest some interest in his social media activity where he scrubbed everything from his social media accounts about the Ravens. He unfollowed them and all. Like that's juvenile stuff to us. It always makes you wonder what the whole process is for evaluating him, knowing that he is it's two sides of Patrick Queen because pre-Roquan he was inconsistent at best, and then you now take all of responsibility off of him, and he is a dynamite player all of a sudden. It just for where we drafted him, that just seems like it's almost like we drafted him too high for what he's given us in return so far.
Well, I think that's a fact. I don't think that's wrong. I think he was definitely drafted too high.
Yeah, I think
he's small, man. I don't know if he could ever be that stud linebacker.
Yeah, he's someone where I think in that draft where they pick him 28th. I think right at the end of the first round. So to me, it was either I liked Patrick Queen. I loved T. Higgins in that draft. I would have probably taken him. It was between Queen and Higgins for me. I think, Higgins has turned out to be an absolute stud in Cincinnati. But I think with Queen, I will give him credit. I think that he played a lot better to begin the year last year before Roquan came in. Now, obviously, it was taken to a whole nother level once Roquan came in. But I just feel like with Queen, and everything that he was. And the 2020 rookie like mini camp stuff was so weird because that was when COVID hit and they didn't really have any like in-person stuff. Like that was Queen and Dobbins and Matabike and all those guys. They didn't get the opportunity to be in person with coaches. And Queen started off really, really slow when they needed him in a role because they drafted him and they said, you're going to play like now and you're going to be the guy now. And it's not the same. It's actually pretty different, but it somewhat reminds me of what happened with Patrick Owasso back when CJ Mosley left. When CJ Mosley was the guy, was great. Wasn't a lot of responsibility. He could play really well, great blitzing linebacker. And then they went into that 2019 season after Mosley left with Owasso and Kenny Young. Owasso had the experience next to Mosley, but not as the green dot guy, like in the middle of the defense. And Kenny Young was coming in and he wasn't experienced either. And it was a disaster. They had to bring, what happened. They had to bring in Josh Bynes and LJ Fort. They ended up trading Kenny Young for Marcus Peters, which was another just absolute steal of a deal from DaCosta. But it reminds me of that a little bit, not to the same effect, but sometimes when a guy comes in, you can play next to a guy. It just helps with consistency and helps with rhythm. Where it might not necessarily be, you need to have a guy next to you at all times, but sometimes a guy's just a really good fit next to you. I think Mosley was a great fit next to Owasso, and in this situation, I think Smith is a great fit next to Queen. It's unfortunate. I think we're only going to get, the year and a half this year plus, the back half of last year, but they fit well next to each other. They both play really hard. They're both heat-seeking missiles and both really good in run defense, while Smith also brings that added pass defense where he can go and cover guys. Queen, I don't think is strong there. So they fit together well where they both have really great similarities, but then the differences they can make up for the other's weaknesses.
Yeah, it's tough to argue that. We're just looking at a situation now where, given the circumstances, that 2020 draft just might be a complete wash. Yeah. Given the underperformance of the top three picks.
Yeah, I think honestly 2019 was the one. I think 2020 was fine compared to 2019. 2019 was not wonderful. That's probably putting it pretty lightly. But
Josh has lamented that 2019 was an overall cluster of a draft. It was just not good.
Yeah, I mean, Marquise Brown, he's showing it in Arizona, but I think every player in that draft is every player on that draft off the team now because Ben Powers left.
I think so.
Powers was the last guy.
Yeah, yep. So I think every player in that draft is off the team. 2020, I think Matabike's shown something. I think Dobbins is good. Queen, again, I personally would have taken Higgins. I was fine with the Queen pick at the time. I'm still fine with it. Like, I think it was a fine pick, but obviously Higgins is what Higgins is. But I think the last couple of drafts have been a lot better. I'm a lot more impressed with what I've seen the last couple of years from the Ravens in the drafting department. But 2019 was not great. 2020 was okay. I think actually in that draft, the one pick that I was like, who is like Broderick Washington? I was not very high on that pick. He's proven me he's a really good player for where he was taken.
Very good player. He's going to get paid a lot of money too.
He's turned in. I think that duo of Matabike and Washington, especially, Washington's been great for him. So I was wrong on that pick, and I will 100% admit it. I'm glad I was too. I'm glad I was wrong. But 2020, I think just the way Queen was so inconsistent his first 2 years, a lot of fans, and this is the comparison I used when he was still struggling, was if this was a team like Jacksonville, well, not Jacksonville anymore, I guess, a team like an Arizona, where you're able to kind of work through your mistakes. There aren't a lot of expectations on you. I think Queen would have been fine there because he'd be able to work through that. The thing in Baltimore is they're competing mostly every season for a Super Bowl, or at least playoff appearances and deep playoff runs. You can't make a lot of mistakes in that defense, or else it's going to cost you wins, which costs you seeding, which costs you playoff bursts, and that costs you. So I think there was a lot of high pressure leverage moments for Patrick Queen early on in an NFL career where he was still learning and didn't have a lot of starting experience anyway. I think he has grown from that and learned from it, but the first 2 years were a struggle of him being up and down. And in some situations, it did cost them, which I think a lot of people I think a lot of people had a lot of problems with it.
When you talk about Broderick Jones or Broderick Washington, he gives you Art Jones vibes. To me, he's Art Jones of this generation, where he was a mid-round pick, was kind of relatively unknown in the defense. I think he's going to make his money this year. This might be his last year here unless they invest in him over Matabike. But I think honestly that Washington's the better of the two.
Well, and that's the thing where the defensive line, like this year, they're fine. Next year, they have a lot of questions to answer because I think the only guy under contract, if I'm not mistaken, is Travis Jones.
Yep.
So Matabike and Washington both could earn big money contracts. Brent Urban's on a 1-year deal. This is, I think, the last year of Pierce's deal, or maybe he has one. I can't remember. Maybe he has one left. Maybe this is the last year. But regardless,
I think he has one more year after this.
But he says he's going to retire after this. He's kind of floated. He's going to retire after this deal is up. So they're going to have to start investing either in like bringing back a Matabike or both, or Washington too. But also, I think we're going to see them invest in the draft. Maybe they'll take a first or a second round defensive lineman. Maybe they'll sign someone in free agency. There's a lot of uncertainty after this year. And while Baltimore, we talked about, Roger Washington and Justin Matabike both are up for that. But then it's the other guys too. Like we talked about Dobbins, we talked about Queen. They're going to have to make some decisions there while also getting into who can we re-sign and what's our cap situation down the line. Because when the Ravens make these deals, when Eric DeCosta makes these deals, he's not just thinking about the next year. He's thinking down the line, years and years down the line. How is it going to impact? Even when you talk about Odell in that deal with the void years, if it does not work out in Baltimore this year and they move on, they're going to have that cap hit at the end of next year because the void years, they were able to lessen the cap hit this year. So there's a lot they have to think about, but defensive line, I think I've called it a sneaky need for the past 2 years. After this year is going to be a major one because they're going to have to figure out who they want in that room because it's going to look very different, I feel like.
Yeah. I wanted to kind of go back to the offense a little bit. I know we touched on it real early in the show. A lot of people are clamoring for DeAndre Hopkins. And as much as I want him here, it's got to make sense financially. We know that. And like you said, we have a give or take 10 or 11 million in cap. And I don't believe Zay Flowers is under contract yet. So there's still some there that's going to have to go to Zay Flowers if it already hasn't been accounted for in that formula. But
it's accounted for.
If you sign DeAndre Hopkins, that essentially makes Zay Flowers your 3 or 4.
Yeah, I think 4.
So are you going to stunt your first round wide receiver's potential growth by bringing in another veteran, even though it is Hopkins? You know what I'm saying? Like,
I don't think it's happening, guys. Come on. I know Arizona is eating like a portion of his salary, but I mean, if they brought him in, like only so many guys are going to get touched. I mean,
right. I just have a hard time, thinking about the DeAndre Hopkins signing when you're going to ask DeAndre Hopkins to play for a couple million and you just gave Odell 18.
Yeah. Well,
and Hopkins has played a lot more recently than Odell.
And that shocked me because the Ravens don't really pay wide receivers like that. So that was a bold on a move they normally wouldn't do. I've never seen them do anything like it. But I like it. I'm happy. I've never seen this much talent. You guys want to know what my biggest worry is? Lamar's got a lot of pressure. I know he's got his money. But he's got a completely new offense where he's already said and it's kind of leaked out where he's going to have a lot of checks, a lot of decisions, a lot of things he can do. We've never seen Lamar in that role. When you're a quarterback, that's a lot going on, man. Is he checking into the right play? Is he, he's got a lot of pressure on him, man. The new offense, to me, it kind of worried me. And they even mentioned it on 105.7 The Fan yesterday. How slow they were being with Lamar getting him out there. And Vinny said today, that tells him, and he's an NFL guy, that he didn't pick up the playbook as fast or he wasn't studying. So I'm a little worried. I think he can do it, but I think it's going to take everything he has, and he's going to have to show he's going to have to put the work in.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that there will probably be growing pains early on. I mean, we saw it in the defense last year too, where and I know it's different offense versus defense. They're very big differences when it comes to that. But
Yeah.
the Miami game was one where you kind of say if this defense was not so new, they probably win that game because it was a historic collapse. It was awful to watch, honestly, because
Yes, it
there were
was.
situations where Mike McDonald needed to play his guys more aggressively, and he played them super deep. Then the plays where he played them super deep, they didn't need to be in that situation. So I'd expect some growing pains early. I'm not going to say it's perfect. Now, the week one Ravens are like the greatest team of all time outside of like the Las Vegas game a couple years ago. So I think they'll wipe the Texans, and that'll be that. But then, yeah, this is a big stretch for them, though, because they don't really have the cushion to have growing pains because they have 3 division games. All their division games on the road are in the first 5 weeks. Then they're done with them. So if you start off 1-2 in your division, 0-3 in your division, I don't think that will happen. But if you don't get off to a good division start early and don't capitalize on at least getting 2 wins off of, getting a win off Cincinnati, getting a win off Pittsburgh, etc., that could come down to hurt you when it comes down to seeding in week 18, or you're playing for a playoff wild card division berth, or just seeding overall. So I do think there will be growing pains early on. I think we will see it get better as the season goes on. And this is a shift for everybody. I mean, we're going from a team that ran the ball historically more than anyone for multiple seasons. 2021 was different because they lost their entire running back room and they were a top 10 passing team in terms of attempts. But this is a team that runs the ball, and that's been their identity. They are essentially changing a lot of their identity offensively. Not that they can't do it, but it's not going to just be they step on the field and everything's good for 4 months or 5 or 6 or however long their run is. They're going to have to go through some pains early on, and that's okay. I'm not going to say the sky's falling if that does happen, but it comes down to if they lose a game or two in September, it comes back to haunt them in January. You're kind of look at it. You're going to look at it and be like, dang, they really should have won that game. They really should have won that game because it could be the difference between a division crown or a wild card berth or the 5 seed versus the 7 seed or something like that. So I think there was a little more cushion for him last year to have growing pains. There's not as much this year, in my opinion.
Well, that's a very good assessment of the team as a whole and what we're looking forward to this coming year. Kevin, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show, man. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. Before I let you go, man, let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me, guys. You can find me over on Twitter at ChaosStriker34. I host and produce Locked On Ravens. We're 5 days a week, Ravens podcast. So on YouTube, anywhere you get your audio podcast, you can subscribe for free over there. And then also write for the Ravens Wire. So any Ravens written content, you can find me over there.
Awesome.
Sounds good.
Thanks,
Thank you so much. Hang around for a post show for a minute or two, and that'll do it. Josh, go ahead and shut us down, man.
All right, Baltimore sports fans. Hopefully the Orioles bounce back and the pitching gets back to doing what it was doing. The series sucked. But it'll get better. Shut it down, man. Go to bed.